The text message that destroyed my family wasn't meant for me to see. But sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of timing, and my 16-year-old niece Emma knew exactly what she was doing when she slid her phone across the tablecloth during Christmas dinner. I'm still processing what happened next, how a single screenshot shattered 23 years of marriage and exposed the person I thought I knew better than anyone. How my sister's teenage daughter became the unlikely hero who saved me from living a lie. And how a holiday that was supposed to bring our family together instead became the day I learned that the people closest to you can be the ones hiding the biggest secrets. The message was simple, brutal, and undeniable. But what I did with that information? Well, that's where this story gets complicated. 3 months ago, life felt predictable in the best possible way. My husband David and I had our routines down to a science after more than 2 decades together. Tuesday, date nights at our favorite Italian place. Weekend farmers market runs where he'd complain about the organic vegetable prices while secretly buying me the expensive honey I loved. Sunday dinners with my sister Karen and her family, where Emma would roll her eyes at our adult conversations but still curl up next to me on the couch afterward. Our house on Maple Street had become the unofficial family gathering spot. David loved playing host. He'd spend hours preparing elaborate meals, setting the perfect table, making sure everyone felt welcomed and fed. Food is love, he'd always say, kissing my forehead as he adjusted the centerpiece for the 100th time. Karen often joked that she was jealous of our marriage. "You two still act like newlyweds," she'd tease, watching David automatically refill my wine glass or how we'd unconsciously reach for each other's hands during movies. Even Emma, cynical about romance as most teenagers are, would sometimes comment on how gross but cute we were together. I worked as a high school counselor, David as an architect. We had our separate professional lives but always came together in the evenings, sharing stories over dinner, planning weekend adventures, talking about the future. We'd been trying to have children for years before accepting it wasn't meant to be, and we'd found peace in being the cool aunt and uncle, the couple with time for spontaneous trips and long conversations. The holidays were always our favorite time. David would transform our house into something magical, twinkling lights in every window, the smell of cinnamon and pine, carefully wrapped presents arranged like a magazine spread. This Christmas felt especially warm because Emma had been staying with us more often, claiming she needed space from Mom's new boyfriend drama. Really, I think she just loved having David's undivided attention in the kitchen and my ear for her teenage angst. Everything seemed normal. Better than normal. Actually, perfect. The moment that changed everything started so innocuously. We were 3 courses into David's famous Christmas feast: honey-glazed ham, roasted vegetables that somehow tasted like heaven, his grandmother's stuffing recipe that he guarded like a state secret. The dining room glowed with candlelight, and conversation flowed as easily as the wine David kept pouring. Emma had been quieter than usual, picking at her food and checking her phone more frequently than normal. When Karen scolded her about being antisocial, Emma just shrugged and slipped the device under the table. I assumed she was texting friends or scrolling through social media like any other teenager avoiding family time. But then I felt her knee bump against mine. Then again, more insistent. When I looked over, she was staring at me with an intensity that made my stomach flutter with unexplained anxiety. Her phone was face down on her lap, and she kept glancing between me and David, who was launching into an animated story about a difficult client. "Aunt Lisa," she whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "I need to show you something." The way she said it, urgent, scared, protective, made every instinct in my body go on high alert. Emma wasn't dramatic by nature. She was practical, observant, sometimes brutally honest. If she looked worried, there was a reason. She slid her phone across my lap, screen still face down. "Don't let anyone see," she mouthed. My hands were shaking as I flipped it over. The screen showed a text conversation, and it took me several seconds to process what I was reading. The contact name at the top made my blood freeze. David M. My husband's full name, the way someone who didn't know him intimately might save his number. The messages were explicit, detailed, recent, some from just hours before our dinner. Plans for meeting up, references to previous encounters, language that left no room for misinterpretation. But what made me physically nauseous wasn't just the content. It was the other person in the conversation. Someone whose name I recognized. Someone whose number Emma would have in her phone for completely innocent reasons. Ms. Rodriguez, Emma's high school Spanish teacher. To understand why this betrayal cut so deep, you need to know how David and I met Carolina Rodriguez. It was through Emma, naturally. She'd been struggling with Spanish during her sophomore year, and we'd attended a parent-teacher conference to discuss extra support options. Carolina was everything you'd want in a teacher. Patient, encouraging, genuinely invested in her students' success. She was probably 15 years younger than David and me, with the kind of effortless beauty that made you simultaneously envious and charmed. But more than that, she was kind. She stayed after school to help Emma, sent encouraging texts about her progress, even attended Emma's soccer games when she could. When Emma's grades improved, dramatically, we invited Carolina to dinner as a thank you. David went overboard, as usual, preparing a spread that could have fed 12 people, insisting she try his homemade bread, regaling her with stories about our travels to Spain and his attempts to learn the language. I remembered feeling slightly embarrassed by how hard he was trying to impress her, but I chalked it up to David being David, the eternal people-pleaser who wanted everyone to love him as much as I did. Carolina seemed charmed by his attention, laughing at his jokes, praising his cooking with an enthusiasm that made him practically glow. After that, she became a fixture in our lives. She'd stop by occasionally when picking Emma up from our house. We'd run into her at community events, and David would always insist we chat for 20 minutes about her classes, her weekend plans, her thoughts on whatever book she was reading. I found their conversations slightly intense but never threatening. David was naturally charismatic, and younger women often seemed drawn to his confidence and humor. What I didn't realize was how their text conversations had started. Just checking on Emma's progress had somehow evolved into daily messages about everything and nothing. David's phone was always buzzing, and when I'd ask who it was, he'd say, "Work," or "That client again," with the casual dismissiveness of someone who'd practiced the lie. I'd actually encouraged their friendship. When Carolina mentioned feeling isolated as a new teacher in town, I'd suggested David connect her with other people we knew. When she seemed stressed about her apartment hunting, I'd offered to help her look at places. I'd been the supportive wife, happy that my husband was being helpful to someone who'd done so much for our niece. The timeline I was piecing together in my head made me sick. Every dinner invitation, every friendly text I'd seen him send her, every time he'd mentioned her name with just a little too much enthusiasm, it had all been foreplay to something much bigger. Emma must have seen the messages on Carolina's phone somehow. Maybe the teacher had left it unlocked, or maybe Emma had been suspicious for longer than I realized. Teenagers are incredibly perceptive about adult behavior, especially when adults think they're being subtle. Sitting at that dinner table, I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. David was still talking, gesturing with his wine glass, completely unaware that his entire world was about to implode. Karen was laughing at something he'd said. Emma was watching me with those careful, concerned eyes, waiting to see how I'd react. I excused myself to the bathroom, taking Emma's phone with me. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely hold the device steady as I scrolled through more of the conversation. Days of messages, weeks, References to meetings I now realized coincided with David's late work nights and client dinners. Intimate. Details about our house, our marriage, our private life that he'd apparently been sharing. One message made me physically lean against the bathroom wall. She suspects something. Asked why I've been working so late. Had to be more careful. Another. Wish you could stay the night. Hate sending you home to that bed. And the most recent sent just 3 hours ago while I was setting the table. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. This family dinner is torture knowing what we're doing after. Tomorrow. They had plans for tomorrow. The day after Christmas. When I returned to the table, everything looked exactly the same but felt completely different. David's smile seemed calculating now. The way he kept checking his phone seemed suspicious. When he complimented my dress, the red one he'd bought me for our anniversary, I wondered if he'd described it to her, if they'd laughed about his dutiful husband act. I made it through the rest of dinner on autopilot. I asked appropriate questions, laughed at appropriate moments, helped clear dishes like nothing had changed. But inside, I was frantically trying to decide what to do next. Emma kept catching my eye, her expression a mix of concern and guilt. She'd obviously been wrestling with whether to tell me, and I could see the relief on her face that the secret was finally out. But she also looked scared, probably realizing she'd just lit a fuse that would blow up her uncle's marriage. After dessert, while David was in the kitchen making coffee, Emma approached me in the living room. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do. I've been seeing the messages for weeks." "How?" I asked quietly. She left her phone in the classroom during lunch. A message popped up from Uncle David with stuff I couldn't unsee. I took pictures because I thought maybe I was wrong about what it meant, but... She trailed off, looking miserable. "You did the right thing," I told her, though I wasn't sure if that was true. Was ignorance better than this crushing knowledge? Would I have been happier living the lie? But then David returned with coffee, and the way he smiled at me, that practiced, loving smile I'd treasured for over 20 years, made me realize I couldn't go back to not knowing. Every kiss would feel like betrayal. Every "I love you" would sound like manipulation. The evening ended normally. Karen and Emma left around 9, with hugs and plans for post-Christmas shopping. David and I cleaned up together, our usual efficient partnership, chatting about the success of the dinner and our plans for the next day. "I'm thinking we sleep in tomorrow," he said, loading the dishwasher. "Maybe drive out to the coast for lunch? That place you love with the ocean view?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. He was planning a romantic day trip while simultaneously planning to meet his mistress. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. "Actually," I said carefully, "I was thinking of visiting my mom tomorrow. She seemed lonely when I talked to her yesterday." David's face fell slightly, probably because it would interfere with his plans. "Oh, okay. I might catch up on some work projects then." There it was. The lie, delivered so smoothly I almost admired his skill. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay next to David, listening to his peaceful breathing, watching the familiar rise and fall of his chest, and feeling like I was sharing a bed with a stranger. Every few minutes his phone would buzz with a text, and he'd unconsciously reach for it even in his sleep. At 6 a.m., I gave up pretending to rest. I made coffee, sat at our kitchen table, and tried to figure out what I wanted to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw things, to dramatically confront him with the evidence and watch him squirm. Another part wanted to pack a bag and disappear before he woke up, leaving only Emma's screenshots and a note. But mostly, I just wanted answers. I wanted to understand how we'd gotten here. David wandered downstairs around 8, hair messy, wearing the old college t-shirt I'd bought him for his birthday 15 years ago. He looked so normal, so much like the man I'd fallen in love with, that for a moment I questioned everything. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the messages were taken out of context. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing the top of my head as he reached for a coffee mug. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was true enough. He settled into the chair across from me, and we sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. This was our routine. Quiet morning coffee before the day began, a moment of peace together. How many of these mornings had been lies? "David," I said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Something in my tone made him look up sharply. "Okay," he said cautiously. "Are you having an affair?" The question hung in the air between us. I watched his face carefully, looking for tells I'd somehow missed before. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way his hand stilled on his coffee mug, the pause that lasted just a beat too long. "What?" "Lisa. No." "Why would you ask that?" But his voice was different. Higher. The same tone he used when he was trying to convince difficult clients to approve his designs. "I've seen the messages, David. Between you and Carolina Rodriguez." All the color drained from his face. For a moment he looked like he might deny it anyway, and I almost hoped he would. At least then I could cling to the possibility that there was some misunderstanding. Instead, he put his head in his hands. "Fuck. That's all you have to say?" He looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Panic. Real, desperate panic. "Lisa, I can explain." "Then explain." It's not. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just kind of evolved. We were texting about Emma, and then we started talking. About other things. And she was going through a hard time with her ex-boyfriend, and I was just trying to be supportive. Supportive? The word came out sharper than I intended. "Is that what you call making plans to meet her the day after Christmas? Is that what you call telling her you hate sending her home to our bed?" His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You read all of them?" "Emma showed them to me. Your 16-year-old niece had to tell me my husband was cheating because she couldn't stand watching me be humiliated anymore." That hit him like a physical blow. David loved Emma, and knowing she'd discovered his secret clearly devastated him. Oh God. Emma knows? Emma's been carrying this secret for weeks, David. A child has been protecting me from my own husband's lies. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said quietly. "It was just, she made me feel different. Younger. Like I was interesting again." "And I don't make you feel interesting?" "That's not what I meant." He reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away. "Lisa, you have to understand. 23 years is a long time. We've become so comfortable, so routine." When Carolina looked at me, I remembered what it felt like to be wanted, not just needed. The words cut deeper than I expected. "So this is my fault? For being a comfortable wife?" "No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I made a terrible mistake, and I know how to fix it. I'll end things with her today, right now. She doesn't mean anything to me, not compared to you." But that was somehow worse than if he'd said he loved her. At least love would have been an understandable reason to destroy our marriage. This was just selfishness. Midlife crisis bullshit that had blown up both our lives. "How long?" I asked. "What?" "How long has it been physical?" Another pause. 2 months. 2 months of lies. 2 months of him coming home to me after being with her. 2 months of me worrying about his stress levels and long work hours while he was building a secret life. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "Lisa, please. Let's talk about this. Let's go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." "You can't fix this, David. You can't unsend those messages. You can't take back 2 months of lying to my face every single day. You can't undo the fact that our niece had to protect me from my own husband." He started crying then, big, messy tears that once would have broken my heart. Now they just made me tired. "Please don't do this. I love you. I've always loved you. This thing with Carolina, it's nothing. It's just a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. A mistake is double booking dinner plans. This is a choice, David. You chose her, again and again, for 2 months. You chose to risk everything we built together for what? Some excitement? Some validation?" I stood up from the table, suddenly unable to sit still. "I want you out of the house by the end of the week. We'll figure out the rest later." The next few days passed in a blur of logistics and numbness. David moved into a hotel, sending me increasingly desperate texts that I mostly ignored. Emma called twice to check on me. Her young voice heavy with guilt I kept trying to reassure her wasn't hers to carry. Karen offered to come stay with me, but I needed space to process everything alone. The house felt enormous and strange without David's constant presence. No coffee brewing when I woke up. No sounds from his home office. No one to automatically reach for the remote during our evening TV time. I wandered through rooms that suddenly felt like museum exhibits of a life that no longer existed. I called in sick to work for the rest of the holiday week. Every time I tried to imagine sitting across from troubled teenagers, helping them navigate their problems, I felt like a fraud. How could I counsel anyone about relationships when I'd been so blind to the cracks in my own? Carolina Rodriguez called me once. I let it go to voicemail, but I listened to the message. Her voice was shaky, apologetic, trying to explain that she never meant to hurt me, that she cared about David but understood it was over now. She sounded young and scared, and for a brief moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered that she'd sat at my dinner table, eaten my food, accepted my friendship while planning to meet my husband. The sympathy evaporated quickly. David's attempts to reconcile became more elaborate as the week went on. Flowers appeared on my doorstep, the expensive kind from the florist downtown, not grocery store bouquets. He left voicemails reading from letters he'd written, promises to attend therapy, to be transparent, to earn back my trust. He even contacted my sister, trying to get her to intervene on his behalf. But Karen, protective as always, told him exactly what she thought of his behavior. "You don't get to use Emma as your messenger service to fix the marriage you destroyed," she'd said, according to Emma, who'd overheard the conversation. The worst part wasn't the anger or the hurt. It was the way this betrayal colored every memory. I found myself analyzing years of our relationship through this new lens. Had there been other affairs I'd missed? How many times had he lied to me with that same easy smile? Were any of his expressions of love genuine, or was I just the reliable constant while he sought excitement elsewhere? I started sleeping in the guest room, unable to be in the bed we'd shared. I boxed up photos of us together, not ready to throw them away but unable to look at his face without seeing Carolina's name on his phone screen. Friends began calling as word spread through our social circle. Some offered support. Others seemed uncomfortably curious about details I wasn't ready to share. A few suggested I was overreacting, that marriages survived infidelity all the time, that David was clearly remorseful and deserved a second chance. Those conversations were almost harder than the betrayal itself, the assumption that I should be grateful for his willingness to fix what he'd broken, the implication that leaving him would be giving up too easily on something worth saving. But sitting alone in my quiet house, I realized something surprising. I wasn't devastated. I was angry, hurt, disappointed, but not destroyed. Maybe that said something important about the state of our marriage before I'd learned about Carolina. Maybe David wasn't the only one who'd been going through the motions. It's been 6 weeks since that Christmas dinner, and I'm still processing everything that's changed. The divorce papers were filed last week. A sentence I never thought I'd write about my own life. David has stopped trying to convince me to reconcile, though he sends the occasional text asking about practical matters like mail forwarding and tax documents. The strangest thing is how normal I feel most of the time. I expected to be a mess, crying constantly, unable to function, desperate to win him back. Instead, I've discovered a kind of peace in the simplicity of my new life. No more wondering why he seemed distracted. No more making excuses for his frequent work emergencies. No more second-guessing my instincts about his mood changes. Emma and I have grown closer through all of this. She still carries guilt about being the messenger, but I've tried to help her understand that she saved me from living a lie indefinitely. Last week, she told me she's considering switching out of Ms. Rodriguez's class for the spring semester. I told her she should do whatever feels right for her education, not worry about protecting my feelings. I went back to work this week, and it felt good to focus on other people's problems for a while. Teenagers are remarkably resilient, and watching them navigate their complicated lives reminded me that I have that same resilience. I survived high school heartbreak, college uncertainty, career challenges, fertility struggles, the death of both my parents. I'll survive this too. The house is slowly becoming mine rather than ours. I've rearranged furniture, hung new artwork, created spaces that reflect my taste without compromise. It's smaller than it used to feel, but also more peaceful. I'm sleeping better than I have in months. I won't pretend this has been easy or that I don't have moments of crushing sadness about the future we'd planned together. 23 years don't disappear overnight, and sometimes I catch myself reaching for my phone to share something funny with David before remembering our new reality. But I'm also discovering parts of myself that got lost somewhere in our comfortable routine. I'm reading books David would have found boring. I'm planning a solo trip to Ireland, something I'd mentioned wanting to do for years while he found reasons to postpone it. I'm considering getting a dog, something he'd always resisted because of his allergies. Most importantly, I'm learning to trust my instincts again. For months, maybe years, I'd been sensing that something was off in our marriage without being able to name it. I'd dismiss those feelings as paranoia or insecurity. Now I know they were my subconscious picking up on lies my conscious mind wasn't ready to acknowledge. So here's my question for all of you. Did I give up too easily, or was I right to end things immediately? I know some of you are thinking I should have fought harder for my marriage, that everyone deserves a second chance, that love means forgiveness. Others probably think I was too patient, that I should have confronted him the moment Emma showed me those messages. What would you have done? Could you have rebuilt trust after discovering not just the affair, but months of elaborate lies? Or would you, like me, have realized that the person you thought you knew never really existed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear different perspectives on this mess I'm still navigating.